On Christmas Eve, the city shimmered with glittering lights, shop windows adorned with ornaments, and hurried footsteps of families rushing to finish their last-minute shopping. Among them moved Daniel Mercer, a billionaire real estate tycoon, whose life was often portrayed in glossy magazines and news profiles. Behind the sheen of success, however, Daniel carried the quiet loneliness of a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, after the loss of his wife 3 years earlier. Despite the endless wealth at his disposal, Daniel found little joy in the season. Celebrations had become more about appearances than meaning. His heart often felt like a hollow echo inside his luxurious penthouse, as he left an upscale toy store, carrying a carefully wrapped gift that his assistant had recommended for Lily. Daniel's gaze caught sight of a figure sitting on the icy sidewalk near the edge of the square, wrapped in a tattered coat and with a thin blanket barely covering. Her legs, the woman seemed to dissolve into the shadows that people stepped around without acknowledgement. Her skin was dark, her hair disheveled, and her hands trembled as she cupped them together, not for coins, but for warmth. Out to passers-by, nor did she stretch her hand for pity. She simply stared at the ground as though the weight of her life pressed her into the pavement. Something about her stillness made Daniel pause. Lily, skipping lightly beside him, noticed his sudden stop. "Daddy, why is she sitting there?" she asked, her innocent voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and concern. Daniel had no answer. Ready. He had taught Lily about kindness, about giving. Yet here was a situation that tested whether he practiced what he preached. Approaching the woman cautiously, Daniel offered a gentle greeting. She lifted her head, and in her eyes was a depth of pain that words could not disguise. She looked at him, not as a billionaire or benefactor, but as a man intruding on her fragile dignity. Her name, he learned, after offering her a cup of hot coffee from the nearby cafe, was Mariah. She had once worked as a nurse, dedicating her life to caring for others, until a series of misfortunes, her mother's illness, crushing medical debt, and the loss of her job, left her without a home. She spoke softly, every sentence carrying both exhaustion and resilience. Daniel, accustomed to boardroom negotiations and polished conversations, found himself disarmed by her unvarnished truth. At one point, Lily tugged on Mariah's sleeve and asked why she wasn't at home for Christmas. The woman paused, her lips quivering as she considered how to answer a child whose world still brimmed with innocence. "Because sometimes life takes away everything you thought you'd always have," she said quietly. "But even when you have nothing, you still hope someone might see you, not as a burden, but as a person." Her words, spoken in a tone of resignation yet tinged with dignity, pierced through Daniel's guarded heart. He realized in that instant how much he had taken for granted: the security, the comfort, the love of a daughter who still had him to rely on. The cold evening pressed around them, but Daniel could not walk away. He offered Mariah food and asked if she had somewhere to stay. She shook her head and explained how shelters were overcrowded, how nights were often spent moving from one public bench to another. Daniel felt an ache of helplessness, for his world was one of abundance, yet hers was one of scarcity, so extreme it stripped even the concept of safety. As their conversation deepened, Mariah shared pieces of her past, of patience she had once held the hands of during their last breaths, of the pride she took in helping people heal, and of the shame she now carried because society judged her solely by her appearance on the street. Daniel listened, not as a man of wealth, but as a human being finally confronted with suffering he could not ignore. He invited her to join him and Lily for Christmas dinner, an offer that startled Mariah. She hesitated, afraid it was charity-wrapped in pity, but Daniel reassured her that it was simply companionship. That night, at his home, Mariah sat at a table where laughter once seemed scarce. Lily, delighted by their guest, pulled her into the rituals of decorating cookies and hanging an extra ornament on the tree. For the first time in years, Daniel felt warmth in his home that money could not buy. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel reflected on how chance encounters often revealed truths one spends years avoiding. Mariah's presence had shattered his illusion that he was giving his daughter everything she needed. In truth, Lily needed not just presence but examples of empathy and humanity. And Mariah, by speaking words that cut through wealth and walls, had given him the gift of perspective. What broke his heart most was her admission. Whispered as Lily drifted to sleep on the couch, "I sometimes wonder if my life has any worth left. If I disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would notice." Those words lingered in the air like a plea, not for money, but for acknowledgement of her existence. Daniel felt his chest tighten, for he knew the world was filled with people who overlooked stories like Mariah's, dismissing them as failures, instead of lives interrupted by circumstance. That night, Daniel resolved not to let her vanish back into the anonymity of the streets. The journey ahead would not be easy. He knew trust was fragile and dignity delicate, but he also knew that humanity demanded more than sympathized required action. The story of Daniel, Lily, and Mariah became not one of wealth, rescuing poverty, but of hearts recognizing one another across the divides of circumstance. It was a reminder that Christmas, stripped of its consumerism, was about connection, compassion, and the courage to truly see another person. In the glow of the tree lights, a billionaire single dad discovered that the greatest gift was not under the branches, but seated humbly at his table, reminding him that love and dignity are the only riches that last.